Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 17, Text 33. Na vartitavyam tad adharma bhandho dharmena satyena cha vartitavye brahma varte yatra yajanti yajnair yajneshwaram yajnavitana vijñāha. Translation. Therefore, O friend of irreligion, you do not deserve to remain in a place where experts perform sacrifices according to truth and religious principles for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Yagneshwara, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the beneficiary of all kinds of sacrificial ceremonies. Such sacrificial ceremonies are prescribed differently in the scriptures for different ages. In other words, sacrifice means to accept the supremacy of the Lord and thereby perform acts by which the Lord may be satisfied in all respects. The atheists do not believe in the existence of God, and so they do not perform any sacrifice for the satisfaction of the Lord. Any place or country where the supremacy of the Lord is accepted and thus sacrifice is performed is called Brahmavarta. There are different countries in different parts of the world, and in each and every country may have different types of sacrifice to please the Supreme Lord. But the central point in pleasing Him is ascertained in the Bhagavatam, and it is truthfulness. The basic principle of religion is truthfulness, and the ultimate goal of all religions is to satisfy the Lord. In this age of Kali, the greatest common formula of sacrifice is the Sankirtan Yajna. That is the opinion of the experts who know how to propagate the process of yajna. Lord Chaitanya preached this method of yajna, and it is understood from this verse that the sacrificial method of Sankirtan Yajna may be performed anywhere and everywhere in order to drive away the personality of Kali and save human society from falling prey to the influence of the age. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport. So we are looking at the chapter titled Punishment and Reward of Kali. So we all know from the previous classes that Maharaj Parikshit was ruling the whole world, and while he was taking a tour of his kingdom, he came across a cow and a bull being beaten by Kali personified, and such miscreants have to be punished by a dutiful Kshatriya or the ruler of the kingdom. And as a dutiful Kshatriya, Maharaj Parikshit took out a sword to kill the Kali personified. The moment he took out the sword to kill the Kali Purusha, Kali personified, Kali begged for forgiveness, and he gave up the dress of a king that he was wearing. Although he was not a king, he was looking like a king. He gave up that dress and he begged for forgiveness from Maharaj Parikshit. Maharaj Parikshit, we all know, is a descendant of the Pandavas, and Pandavas are saintly kings. They are devoted to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Maharaj Parikshit, belonging to the same lineage, had this wonderful quality of forgiveness. And Maharaj Parikshit forgave this Kali personified, and forgiveness is one of the quality of a devotee, and that has been described in the 4th canto, 20th chapter, verse 3 of Bhagavatam, where Prabhupada says that one who is advanced in spiritual knowledge has the quality of forgiveness. So Prabhupada says, one who is both devoted and highly advanced in intelligence does not take action against the soul or the body. If there is any discrepancy, he forgives. It is said that forgiveness is a quality of those who are advanced in spiritual knowledge. And we can see very clearly that Maharaj Parikshit was highly advanced in spiritual knowledge, and therefore he forgave Kali Purusha. So forgiveness is one of the most important qualities. It is one of the divine qualities as mentioned by Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad-gita. In this verse, we can see that Maharaj Parikshit is addressing Kali Purusha. He is saying, therefore, O friend of irreligion, yat tad means therefore, friend of irreligion, adharma bandho. Dharma means religious principles, adharma means irreligious principles. Adharma bandho, you do not deserve to remain. Na vartitavye. Vartitavyam means to deserve. Na vartitavyam means to not deserve. You do not deserve to remain in a place where experts perform sacrifices. The word experts is described by the word vijñāha. Vijñāha means experts. Where experts perform sacrifices. Yajanti yajñaihi. Yajanti means, the word yajanti means to worship. Yajanti yajñai means one who performs sacrifices. Vijñā yajanti yajñaihi, which means the place where experts perform sacrifices. And the name of the place is called Brahmavarta. And according to what do they perform sacrifices? According to truth and religious principles. Dharmena satyena cha vartitavye. According to dharma and truth. Dharma means religious principles. And for what do they perform these sacrifices? They perform sacrifices for Yajneshwaram, for the pleasure or the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. That is what they perform sacrifices. Therefore, O friend of irreligion, you do not deserve to remain in a place where experts perform sacrifices according to truth and religious principles for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Here Maharaj Parikshit does not want Kali Purusha to reside in a place where such sacrifices, such yajna. What is that yajna? For the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A place where such sacrifices are being performed. Maharaj Parikshit does not want Kali Purusha to reside in such places. So, the importance of sacrifice is what Prabhupada mentions in this verse. Prabhupada is saying in the purport, Yajneshwara, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the beneficiary of all kinds of sacrificial ceremonies. He is the beneficiary of all the sacrificial ceremonies. Krishna says in the Bhagavad-gita, Yajñārthāt karmano anyatra lokoyam karma bandhanaha. Yajna refers to sacrifice. And anybody who does not act in the spirit of sacrifice for the Supreme Personality of Godhead is entangled in this material world, is what Krishna says in the Bhagavad-gita. So this principle of sacrifice is what Krishna speaks about throughout the Bhagavad-gita, and Krishna urges Arjuna to act in this spirit of sacrifice for the pleasure of Krishna. In fact, in the Bhagavad-gita begins with the understanding about who the living entity is. The living entity, Krishna says in the Bhagavad-gita, is not this body made up of bones and blood and flesh. He says that we are the consciousness which drives this body. He says we are Atma, or the spirit soul. In the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad-gita, Krishna describes about the nature of the soul. We all know the nature of the body. There is a lot of studies being carried out to understand the nature of the body. But the nature of the soul is described by Krishna in the Bhagavad-gita, and he addresses the most fundamental nature of the soul. In the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad-gita, Krishna says, Nahi kaschit chanamapi jatu tishtati akarmakrit. The nature of the soul is to always act. To act is the nature of the soul. Therefore, if you probably go to a crematorium and you see, a body does not act. Why? Because the soul has left the body. So the nature of the soul is to act. But when it is in the material body, it acts according to the 3 modes of material nature. What are these 3 modes of material nature? The 3 modes of material nature, as some of you told, is Sattva-guna, Rajoguna and Tamoguna. According to the desire of the living entity in the previous life, a living entity acquires a particular body with a particular quality. Somebody may have a body which is predominant in Sattva-guna, somebody may have a body which is predominant in Rajoguna, somebody may have a body which is predominant in Tamoguna. According to this guna, the living entity acts in this material world. In fact, a comparison is given as to how this living entity acts in this material world. We've all seen a puppet, isn't it? A puppet acts according to the directions of a puppeteer. Similarly, the living entity acts according to the dictates of the 3 modes of material nature, and the 3 modes of material nature is a part of Prakriti, is a part of the material nature in this existence. And the living entity helplessly acts according to the pushes of the 3 modes of material nature. Therefore, the spirit soul which has acquired the body of a man behaves like a man. The spirit soul, the same spirit soul, maybe in this life he is having a body of a man, in the next life he may have a body of a woman. He will act like a woman. The same soul, when it acquires the body of a dog, it behaves like a dog. It is the same soul. But the fundamental and the common feature of all species in existence, irrespective of, which species, a dog, a cat, animal species, human species, irrespective of what kind of body one acquires, one common feature is that the soul always has the capacity to act. Activity cannot be separated from the spirit soul. That is what Krishna says here. Nahi kashtit chanamapi jatu tishtati akarmakrit. It cannot remain without karma or activity. The nature of the soul is to always act. The teaching of the Bhagavad-gita by Lord Krishna says that if the spirit soul acts under the control of the material nature, the spirit soul continues his existence in this material world. Krishna urges Arjuna to transcend or go beyond these three modes of material nature and act in a different capacity. He urges Arjuna to act in the capacity of his true spiritual nature. And therefore, Bhagavad-gita is a knowledge which helps us to understand that the living entity can function either under the influence of the three modes of material nature within the realm of material existence, or it can function as a spirit soul in its true spiritual capacity. So, in the three modes of material nature, the capacity to act is there. In its true spiritual nature also, the capacity to act still remains with the soul, because that's the intrinsic nature of the soul. This is what is being described by Prabhupada by a very simple word called dharma. Just like the dharma of sugar is to remain sweet, the dharma of salt is to taste salty. The dharma of the soul is to act. That is a very, very important learning. So, there are two kinds of activities as Krishna describes in the Bhagavad-gita. One is activity of the soul within this material body under the influence of three modes of material nature. The second is to act in the spiritual capacity beyond the three modes of material nature. And if the spirit soul revives its true identity and acts in its spiritual capacity, it is said to be liberated from the influence of the material nature. Therefore, Prabhupada says, without Krishna consciousness, one must always be acting under the three modes of material nature. So, all of us act in the three modes of material nature. And what is the nature of activities of a spirit soul who is influenced by the three modes of material nature is also described by Prabhupada very beautifully in the purport of one of the verses in the Bhagavad-gita. He says that the spirit soul has two kinds of activities in this material world. One activity is called as a self-centered activity. Another activity is called as an extended selfish activities. What are these self-centered activities? These activities are those activities which are carried out for the satisfaction of the senses of the body. We all know that the body is made up of five senses. There is eyes, there is nose, there is ears, there is tongue, and then there is skin. For the tongue, wonderful food gives pleasure. For the ears, beautiful music gives pleasure. For the eyes, beautiful form gives pleasure. The living entity, when the living entity acts only for the sake of seeking these pleasures, it is called self-centered pleasures. But Krishna says a very important point with respect to these self-centered pleasures. Krishna says in the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita, Yehi samsparshaja bhoga dukkha yonaya evate. The word sparsha means to touch. When eyes come in touch with the beautiful form, or when ears come in touch with the beautiful sound, there is pleasure. But Krishna says this pleasure that the living entity is experiencing is the very source of dukkha in this material world. We all want to be happy in this material world, but ironically, what brings happiness in this material world actually brings dukkha for us in this material world. Why? Krishna explains in the next line. He says, Adi antavanta kaunteya nateshu ramate buddhaha. Adi means it has a beginning. If it begins and it sustains throughout our life, it continuously becomes a source of happiness. But unfortunately, the material world is under the influence of kala or time, and therefore it has an end. And because it has an end, it brings distress. Imagine somebody is very, very attached to wealth in this material world. At the end of his life, he is forced to leave this wealth here in this material world and leave. It causes a lot of pain. The degree of attachment that he has in this life for wealth, name, fame, power, position, relationships, to that degree he will experience pain when he is separated, when he is forced by kala to separate from all of these things. That's why Krishna says it is a source of dukkha. So these activities are basically called selfish, self-centered activities which the living entity performs under the influence of the material nature. The next level of activities is extended selfish activities. What are these extended selfish activities? Prabhupada describes that activities performed not only for the self, but for the welfare, for the material welfare of all the living entities. Such activities are definitely appreciated in this material world. There is a place in Russia called Chernobyl. Anybody knows what is Chernobyl? Chernobyl is known for the nuclear reactor. There was a disaster there. The nuclear reactor there became highly unstable and it exploded. And we all know that the nuclear reactor is fundamentally run by radioactive substances. And when such radioactive substances are out in the atmosphere, it basically increases the radiation on the body, and it is very, very harmful to the body. So in Chernobyl, what happened? We all know the explosion happened in Chernobyl, but the disaster itself could have been much worse if it wasn't for the actions of 3 people who kind of reduced the effect of the blast. It is said that there was a chamber in this Chernobyl nuclear power plant, and this chamber had a huge piece of radioactive carbon. And the danger was that this carbon was melting away into the floor, which had a pool of water in it. If that happened, it would have caused a massive steam explosion, and because of which thousands of tons of radioactive material will be thrown into the air, and this will affect not thousands of people, millions of people in Russia. So then the 3 engineers who were there had to take a call. What they did, they quickly decided that someone needed to drain this water before the radioactive carbon melted into water. So what these 3 engineers did, they dove inside, and inside that pool of water there is a drain, and the drain is plugged. So these 3 engineers went and removed this plug, and because of which all the water drained, and because all the water drained, the effect of explosion was minimized. And these three people's name are Alexei, Valerie and Boris. And they all selflessly opted to leap into the water to open that valve which was closing the drain. But later in life, they succumbed to massive doses of radiation and they all died. Their names are celebrated even today in this place of Chernobyl for saving people from such a massive explosion. This is an act of sacrifice. Another story is from Japan. We all know Japan is prone to a lot of earthquakes, frequent earthquakes, and buildings are so designed that they are, they still sustain on earthquakes. But this particular earthquake happened in the 1990s, and there was a lot of rubble. In the midst of a rubble, they could see a house, which was almost in a half collapsed house. And, they were all digging out this rubble to see if there is someone, there in the midst of this, looking to survive. So the rescuers went to this house, which was apparently collapsed. There, very interestingly, they could see a woman. She had knelt on her knees. She had bent down. When you go to a church, you see people kneeling down in their knees and offering prayers with their, palms turned upwards. She was actually like that, in that kind of a pose. And the rescuers, hoping that the woman would still be alive, they, tried to hold her hand, through the gap and through the cracks of that, collapsed building. They could see that the woman is knelt down like that, holding something in her hand, and the rescuers tried to reach her hand. The moment they touched her hand, they could feel that the hand was cold and stiff, indicating that she is dead. So the crew, the rescuing members, decided that, okay, I think she is dead, so there's no point, let's leave. But then the leader of that crew had a doubt. No, let's go back. Let's try to see what she is holding in her hand. And for some reason, the leader was driven by the compelling force to come back to the ruin. And the moment they touched that blanket, they could feel something is moving. And the moment they took out that blanket, they could see a 3-month-old baby in the hands of the mother. Obviously, the women had made an ultimate sacrifice for saving the son. When her house was falling, she used her body to make a cover to protect her son. And of course, the collapse, what happened when the building collapsed, it fell on her body and her head. But the son, little child, was saved. And when they took this whole blanket, the baby and the blanket, and they took to the hospital to check if the baby is fine, everything is okay. When the doctors removed the blanket, they could see a cell phone. And that cell phone had a message. The cell phone had a message. It said, if you can survive, you must remember that I love you. Is the message that the mother had told to the son. This is an act of sacrifice. Why is there sacrifice? Why did this mother sacrifice for the son? It is for the love of the son. So sacrifice is followed by love for somebody. Just like the mother sacrificed for this 3-month-old baby. This expressions of love we see in this material world, it touches our heart, it moves us. This expression of love is a fundamental nature of the soul. And how does living entity express love? It expresses love in this material world through activities in this material world. Therefore, Prabhupada writes in the first canto of the Bhagavatam, first chapter, that every living entity in this material world, whoever has acquired this body, somebody may have the body of Brahma, somebody may have the body of an ant. All of these living entities desires to relish some sort of taste derived from sense perceptions. These sensual pleasures are technically called rasa. What is the rasa that the mother was experiencing with the child? It is a rasa of parental love. All of these things are definitely an expression of the soul. So Prabhupada lists down what are the rasas of the living entity. Raudra is one rasa, anger. Adbhuta, wonder. Shringara, conjugal love. Hasya, comedy. Veera, chivalry. Somebody is very chivalrous, brave, bold. Daya, mercy. Dasya, servitorship. Somebody is a very humble servant. There is servitorship. Sakya, friendship. Like this, there are a list of rasas that the soul expresses. And how does the soul express all these rasas? Through various activities in this material world. The sum total of all these rasas, Prabhupada says, is called affection or love in this material world. Just like the love that the mother had for the son, this love is an expression of that original rasa of the living entity. But when rasa is manifested through this material body, just like the mother or the 3 men who sacrificed in Chernobyl expressed their rasa for their countrymen through the material body, that is called as extended selfish interest. Why? Because it is pertaining to the body. The process of Krishna consciousness or the process of spiritual life means to revive our original rasa in relationship with Krishna. And that constitutional rasa is called dharma. The constitutional rasa that the living entity can experience with the absolute truth. And what is the nature of that constitutional rasa? It is eternal. Unlike the rasa that the mother experienced with the son, all that she had to say for the son was to read a message. All that she could leave was a message for the son. But is she there to live and relish that love? No. That's the nature of rasa in this material world. It is temporary. As far as the spirit souls are concerned, they are qualitatively one with the Lord, meaning that the living entity, the spirit soul, can have that rasa exchange with that Lord. And what is the nature of that rasa exchange? It is eternal. It is undying. The entire Bhagavad-gita is meant for developing that relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The process of spiritual advancement is meant to develop that rasa, and that rasa towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead is called bhakti. Arjuna had bhakti for Krishna, therefore he acted for Krishna. But in what capacity he acted? He acted in the capacity of a Kshatriya, of a warrior. So now that we are all looking for spiritual advancement, some of you may be working in different companies, some of you may be husband, some of you may be wife, some of you may be mother, some of you may be father. How do I act in such a way that I please the Supreme Lord? Is the question that some of you may have. So Krishna answers this in the Bhagavad-gita. Just like Arjuna, although he was Kshatriya, he acted for pleasing Krishna. Similarly, we can also act in our capacity to please Krishna. So that is described by Prabhupada. Prabhupada says that how can we practice this Krishna consciousness in life? Although we may be playing different roles, like I said, some of you may be playing the role of a student, manager, husband, wife, whatever role we may be playing. How do I please Krishna? How do I act to please Krishna just like Arjuna did? So Prabhupada, in fact, Arjuna asks this question in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita to Krishna. In the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita, Arjuna asks Krishna a very interesting question. He says, my dear Krishna, you know that I am a Kshatriya and you are talking about spiritual advancement. How am I how should I make spiritual advancement? How can fighting with Kauravas I can make spiritual advancement? Is this ever possible? You're telling me to kill somebody and you're telling me to make advancement in spiritual life? Similarly, some of you may have question, I have some CAT exam to prepare and you're telling me spiritual advancement, how is it possible? I have lot of responsibility as a manager in my company. Where is the question of spiritual advancement? So, a similar question Arjuna asks, my dear Krishna, you're telling me to fight, but how will I advance spiritually? So Arjuna in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita, he asks Krishna, Sanyasasya mahabaho tattvamichchami veditum tyagasya cha hrishikesha pritak keshi nisudhana. Which means, Krishna, you're telling me to fight like a Kshatriya and make spiritual advancement. But actually, who can make spiritual advancement? It is only a renunciant who can make spiritual advancement. Until and unless I renounce my desire for material life, how can I advance spiritually? I am a Kshatriya. I am supposed to kill people. How can I advance spiritually? So, Arjuna is asking Krishna how to be a renunciant. In other words, how to be a sannyasi. Is Arjuna a sannyasi? He is not a sannyasi. But Krishna very interestingly answers in the next verse. He says, Kamyanam karmanam nyasam sannyasam kavayo viduhu sarva karma palatyagam prahustyagam vichakshanaha. Which means, to give up the result of all activities is called renunciation. And that state is called as the renounced order of life. Although Arjuna was a Kshatriya, he could still be a sannyasi who was spiritually advanced by adopting this principle in life. What is that principle? To give up or renounce the fruits of all activities. This is what Krishna explains in the Bhagavad-gita. Therefore, Bhagavad-gita is a practical way of leading the life. In the beginning of today's class, we understood that the living entity cannot remain without acting. Even to maintain the body, we have to act. We cannot remain without activity. Activity is the nature of the living entity. It must be it must be a definite inherent function of every society in existence. If you see history, there was, at least in the Western countries, there were something called as a feudalistic society. In feudalism, had some leaders of society who had some slaves or peasants. The peasants used to work on the field, used to produce good foodstuff for them, and the lords, the landlords used to just live off the slave. They used to not work. And therefore the society, the peasants or the slaves did a revolt against the lord who were actually exploiting them. That led to communism. Even though they shifted to communism, people were still working. So whether it's feudalism, democracy, communism, to act is the nature of the soul. Now we are living in a capitalistic and a democratic society, and we all are functioning, we are all working for a company. We cannot give up those jobs. But one can learn to act in the spirit of renunciation, and this is what Krishna is urging all of us to do. How to act in the spirit of renunciation? Do not act for the fruits of activities. Krishna in fact says, sacrifice the fruits of those activities for my pleasure, and that is the sacrifice. But whom do we sacrifice for? The mother sacrificed for the child because of the love for the child. So if I have to sacrifice for Krishna, it's very obvious that I must have love for Krishna. Isn't it? Without love for Krishna, there is no question of sacrifice for Krishna. Therefore, Krishna urges Arjuna to sacrifice for him because Arjuna has a loving relationship with Krishna. Now Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives us the process of developing that loving relationship with Krishna, because without love there is no sacrifice. Without sacrifice you will be always entangled in this material world. Yajnartat karmanon yatra karmoyam yajnatar karmanon yatra lokoyam karma bandhanaha. Will be bound by karma. And you cannot live without karma. Then how to act in such a way that I get liberated although I am working in a company? You have to develop love for Krishna. When you develop love for Krishna, you can sacrifice the result of your activity. Somebody may be a manager in a company, and what is the fruits that he is getting? He is getting money. And how to engage that money in the service of Krishna? How to sacrifice that money for the pleasure of Krishna? But there is no question of sacrifice when there is no love. And the process of reviving that love is what Prabhupada writes in the purport of this particular verse. What does Prabhupada say in this verse on how to develop that love for the Supreme Lord? That love for the Supreme Lord is developed by chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. By developing that, by chanting and hearing the Hare Krishna mantra, one can develop the dormant love for Krishna. The original love for Krishna can be developed, and the moment that love for Krishna is developed, we can think of using all our fruits of activities in the service of Krishna. That is the way of Krishna consciousness. Therefore, Prabhupada says in the 18th chapter, verse 9, purport, a man working in Krishna consciousness, in other words, a man who has developed love for Krishna, although he may be working in a factory, he does not associate himself with the work of the factory, nor with the workers of the factory. He simply works for Krishna. Arjuna fought in the battlefield, he killed people, but he was aloof from all the activities that was going on around him because he had developed that sense of love for Krishna. And the process of developing that sense of love for Krishna enables us to perform activities for his pleasure. And that's the process of Krishna consciousness. That is what is the science of Bhagavad-gita. Therefore, many people misunderstand that work is worship. No, work done for the pleasure of Krishna is actually worship. Therefore, you may be playing different roles in your life, but you can use that role for the pleasure of Krishna if you develop love for Krishna. And the process of developing love for Krishna is given to us by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and Prabhupada is describing that this is the ultimate religious principle in this Kali Yuga. And that principle is Sankirtan Yajna, or chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. Therefore, without developing love for Krishna, we cannot sacrifice for Krishna. Therefore, before sacrifice, there must be love. And that love is developed by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, which is Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Therefore, just like Arjuna was a Kshatriya, he developed love for Krishna, Krishna and he perform activities for Krishna. So if you want to perform activities on the spiritual platform that liberates you, it's very, very important for you to develop love for Krishna by chanting and hearing the Hare Krishna mantra. That is what we learn from this particular verse and from Srila Prabhupada's purport. We will continue to see what happens to Kali Purusha, where he is allowed to stay in Maharaj Parikshit's kingdom, and all of those details we will discuss in the next class. With this, we'll stop here. Grantraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande.